because the college football season is upon us once again. Good evening, everybody. I'm Travis Justice, and this is another season of Behind the Point Spread from Doc Talk Podcast presented by Betfred Sports. We want you to be interactive tonight, and the way to do that, well, you can actually call into the show, have a little conversation, and ask really about any game you want to ask about. We may know the answer. We may not know the answer. We will be covering about 5 games tonight, and we'll go through those in just a little bit. But again, we said be interactive, and you can do that by giving us a call at 402-543-5556. Again, that number 543 402 area code 543-5556. If you don't want to call in, but you have a question, you can also leave comments. If you're watching on YouTube, just use the live comment section, and you can ask questions as the night goes along. But let's bring in the star of the show. It's usually Dr. Rob Zatechka, right? It's usually Dr. Rob. Dr. Rob is, well, he's a doctor, and he's a little preoccupied tonight, and he's probably at home going, oh, crap, I'm forgetting to do Behind the Point Spread because he's watching 90,000 people in Memorial Stadium. You can see the game behind me as Nebraska takes on UNO in the night of volleyball in Nebraska. So Dr. Rob not going to join us tonight, but you see on the screen our Vegas insider, Omaha native. He's been down in Las Vegas for a long time, Mr. Scott Spreitzer. Hello, Scott.
How's it going, Travis? Great to be with you guys. Man, I've been talking about doing the show with yourself and, of course, Dr. Rob, the smartest man we both know. And then he doesn't show. You know, what is this doctor stuff? Come on, we're talking point spreads. Is there anything more important going into the month of September?
Probably not in your life, right? I mean, that's probably the most crazy thing. And I asked this. I had Brian Bennett from Betfred Sports on my radio show this morning, and I was asking Brian, I said, hey, this early in the season, how much risk is there for the books with a lot of unknowns, and how much value do you find as a professional bettor during this time?
Yeah, you know, these lines move so much because some of these games, a lot of these games that are going to be played Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday this week have had lines on them since May, you know, in some books. So this isn't like virgin lines that we're jumping into like we will for week 2 of college football and week 2 of the NFL. These lines have been chewed up, spit out, and everything else you can imagine over the past 3.5 months. So, you know, for me, first week of college football, week 0, week 1, first week of NFL, you know, I don't go firing like crazy. I might have 10 or 12 bets on a regular Saturday where I might have 3 in week 1 because of that. And now there'll be bets that I'll make throughout the course of the day, live betting, things like that. But I have a mentor. I might have mentioned him to you on this show before, or on shows we've done on your old radio show. He's 82 years old now, and all he's done since his early 30s is bet for a living: football, basketball, baseball. And in the early 90s, when he got in touch with me when I was doing the old Stardust Line show, I get a phone call and we end up becoming very close friends. And this guy's he's got a law degree from Texas Austin, so he's no dummy. And I say that because he likes to say things like this: going into week 1, going into week 0 of the football season, ain't nobody knows nothing about nothing. And that's how he says it. And this is a guy who's from New York with a great education, but he drops the grammar because he wants to get that point across. And he's right. And it's one of those things where I do have some plays this weekend, but I won't be nearly as busy as far as, you know, going to the window, as we used to say. Now it's going to the app as far as making bets this weekend. And it's, again, you got to be real careful because, you know, a lot of the value is gone on a lot of these games. There's new value created when you see, you know, all of a sudden teams just getting a ton of hype, people piling up on those teams, that line moves. You might get value that you didn't have a month ago. So it's just an ongoing, lots of moving parts type of scenario that first week.
Well, it's interesting because the games we're talking about tonight, we'll get to those in a little bit, but there's already been movement on some of those games, and we'll kind of talk about that. And keep in mind, you may think because Scott's a professional handicapper that he just bets like every game out there. Very selective, and that's what we're talking about. But you were talking about using the app. If you are in a state where Betfred operates, download the Betfred Sports app today and keep watching Behind the Point Spread, because we got some promos for you that's going to put some money in your pocket and also offer you a risk-free bet. Up until now, the only thing you could really bet were some of those futures, you know, win totals for the futures. Did you see any value early on when those early win totals came out?
Yeah, I did on a few, Travis. I know like one of them that I jumped on right away was Wake Forest. I played them under 6.5 wins. It's probably around 6 right now, I believe, last check, but I played them under. We can talk about that in a minute. Also, I thought Clemson at plus $1.50 to win the ACC wasn't a bad bet, so I jumped on that also. I played one that I'm starting to wonder if maybe I should have put as much down on it as I did. I maybe just getting queasy as we get ready for the start of the season. But I played Louisville over their wins total, which was 8 earlier this month or late July. And boy, I think that's a great fit. Bringing the kid in from the head coach from Purdue and bringing him back home and what they got going, I think they're undervalued. So those are 3 of the plays that I made. We've had pretty good fortune. I'm not one of those guys who goes out and goes, I want to make 10 or 15 bets on who's going to win the Super Bowl or who's going to win the national title. But I'll have anywhere from 5 to 8 bets by middle August every single season on wins totals on teams. And again, Wake Forest was one of my favorites playing that under this year.
I thought, we were talking before we went on the air, and I thought you brought up something interesting about Colorado. Colorado has, a 3.5 win total, but you have an interesting stat regarding the Buffaloes that's putting the books at a lot of risk.
It's crazy, man. This team, again, that wins total, 3.5 wins, the Colorado Buffaloes. And, of course, everybody knows about the incredible number of transfers that have come into Colorado, and practically the whole team left in the offseason when Deion arrived. But to show you what the public believes when you hear a whole lot of hype out of a guy who, boy, loved or hated but never ignored, and I'm certainly saying that Deion's more loved than hated, but he's certainly not ignored. He arrives, he starts talking about what he's going to do in Boulder, and the public has followed suit. They have been 500-1 to win the national championship. Good line. 3.5 wins total. Good line by the books. They're one of the most bet teams to win the national title this year of all the teams in college football, Travis. They have taken more action on the Colorado Buffaloes to win the national title than on 4 of the teams that are currently in the top 10. It's something that the books have never seen before, obviously. I've never seen or experienced. And these books stand to lose a whole lot of money. Well, let's just say Colorado's not going to win the national title. But if a miracle happened, they would stand to lose a whole lot of money. I can remember, just recall, I'll make this quick, years ago, a decade ago or so, when we had the old Big East, Syracuse, UConn. They played a 6 overtime game in the Big East Conference tournament, college basketball. And I forget who won the game now. That doesn't really matter for the point. But 6 overtime game, and all I got that night, oh my gosh, I'm going to be going against, let's say it was UConn who won. I'm going against UConn. I'm going against UConn. There's no way they could be ready to go in 24 hours after a 6 overtime game. And I watched that line move and move and move as sharps and public alike are jumping against the team that won the 6 overtime game. No way can they be ready to go. So I just made a little bet on the other side or on UConn. I took the points with the books. And I also sat there and I said to a lot of people before tip-off on radio shows, I'm like, you do realize that if UConn loses this game, the books are going to be closing their doors, and the books don't close their doors. And so that's what I feel like with Colorado. It's like everybody's jumping on the Deion bandwagon, and maybe he tops 3.5 wins. Maybe he gets 6 and they go to a bowl game. But the bottom line is to plunk your money down, if it's any more than entertainment money, on the Buffaloes to win the national title just has me scratching my head. But yeah, I mean, they've taken more money, more monetary bets on Colorado than Ohio State when it comes to winning the national title.
That is crazy, but we all know those national title hopes will be out the door next week when Nebraska beats Colorado out in Boulder, because I think a lot of Husker fans that are watching this show will feel the same way. Now, it is Wednesday. That means you still have time to get your future bets in, and Betfred is offering a Power 5 promo. So place a $20 to a $100 wager on at least one regular season win total market in each of the Power 5 conferences and get 10% Fred bets back based on your lowest stake wager. So if you want to go out and place a future bet, do one on each Power 5 conference between $20 and $100. Betfred's going to give you 10% of that lowest stake wager back. So right now you still have time to get some of those future bets in. We are going to be talking about 5 games tonight. We're going to break down the Boise, Washington game. We're going to be talking about the North Carolina, South Carolina game. You got a rivalry game already to start the week. LSU and FSU. That is an interesting. I'm anxious to hear your comments on that, because that's a huge game to kick it off. Florida State believes it's back. Brian Kelly's done one hell of a job at LSU in just 1 year. and we'll see what year 2 can put out. Of course, each and every week, we're going to talk about the Iowa Hawkeyes. And, of course, we're always going to end the night talking about the Nebraska Cornhuskers. So I'm going to ask you before we even get started with those games, have you laid any money on any of those games?
I have. And, in fact, one of them, the Florida State LSU game, and I'll save who I've got until we get to that game. But that was the first bet that I made this summer, made it back in July. So, and I haven't gotten off the team that I'm on. So we'll talk about that in just a bit. I actually like that team. Out of all the games we're talking about, the bet that I made in there, I think I like the best.
Before we get started with the games, Curlin31 says, who's the second annual Paul Christ early firing lock of the week of the year award winner? So he's asking, what coach is going to get fired first?
Yeah, I remember last year when we called, who was it we called that we said that they would probably be fired by the end of the year, and 2 days later or the next day, the coach got fired up at Wisconsin, right? So
yes.
Yeah, boy, that's a good question. But there are a few guys on the hot seat, including down in Oklahoma. There's a little warm seat there as we speak. I don't know if that would be the first one to go. I'm going to have to really think about that. But there's about 6 or 7 candidates that we have right now for a potential firing. Let me ask you this, Travis, because you're right there in the Midwest. You're right there on the Nebraska-Iowa State line. Have you heard any news about Matt Campbell with some of the controversy this offseason? Does he have to win 7 games, 6 games?
No, I don't think so. I mean, him and J.B. Pollard are really tight. Both Kirk Ferentz and Matt Campbell. Kirk Ferentz has been a lot more outspoken about what's going on here. But both coaches and both athletic departments are finding this a little weird that Iowa and Iowa State are the only 2 athletic departments that have been targeted in this whole thing. And they believe somebody within the state did a tip-off because they're not seeing, don't forget the Alabama baseball coach is the one that got caught first betting actually at the baseball stadium, which was one of the dumbest things ever. And betting on your own sport is stupid, but they think it's more of a witch hunt. And they all agree. If you bet on college football and specifically bet on your team, that's a non-starter. You're gone, and they're okay with that. I think what Kirk Ferentz has said from Iowa is like, listen, if the world is changing, sports betting is legal, and if I got a 21-year-old on here who bet college basketball, so what? And I kind of agree with that. I don't think you should bet football. I don't think you should bet on your own team. That's not what I'm saying. But if you're betting the NBA, if you're betting the Final Four, I don't have a problem with that. And these coaches really have not taken much heat at all. And I would say actually they have the support of their athletic departments, which I think right now is good. You're saying I back them. They're doing it. They're going through the investigation. People have been suspended. Some people have left the program. The thing with Iowa State, you lose your running back and you lose your quarterback. That's a big hit. And Matt Campbell still hasn't named a starting quarterback for Saturday against UNI. So
I'll say this real quickly about that. First of all, folks thinks this is a new thing because there's more legalized gambling. You're out of your mind. This has been going on forever. Yep. Look up Paul Horning. Look up Looney Dawson. Couple of other points on that. I think it's great that the athletic departments are supporting these coaches. I really do. I think legalizing gambling 20 years ago, when I first started doing your radio show that you had in Omaha, we talked about what's going to happen with the legalization of gambling. And I came out and I said, well, right now it's under the radar everywhere. And if you open it up and make it legal, you're going to catch issues where you wouldn't have caught it 20 years ago.
100%.
Going on. It's just being caught now because it's out in the open. Here's the one thing, and I agree with you. I don't think a college quarterback should be betting on football. Go bet on your basketball team, whatever. I'll say this, though, real quickly. I saw one kid had like 300 bets totaling $900. These guys weren't doing anything nefarious. These guys weren't moving lines. That's an average of $3 per bet. Yeah, I'm going to guess 80% of their bets were 10-team parlays for $5.
Yeah, because that's the biggest payoff, right? You're like, let's put a $10 10-teamer down and see what we get, and we'll get a lot of money. And they realize quickly that you're never going to hit a 10-teamer. The odds of that happening are slim and none. And Slim just left town. Let's dive into the first game of the night. That's going to be Boise State at Washington. It's Saturday at 2:30 on ESPN. Right now, Washington a 14.5-point favorite. Over under at 58.5.
Yeah, and this number has basically remained right around there. It was as high as 15 at one point. There are some 14s out there, but for the most part, 14 and a half. And that total in a few books opened as high as 62. So that has come down, as you mentioned, at Betfred, 58 and a half. I've seen some 59s out there earlier today. I'm always careful early in the season, obviously, when it comes to hype, too much hype on a team. And I'm not talking about Bama, Georgia. Ohio State for the last decade plus. Those teams, they deserve the benefit of the doubt. They should be hyped all they can. But the bottom line is Washington is receiving a ton of hype right now. And they do have great skill players. They got Penix back, guys like that. They're going to be able to do things with their skilled people. But this team has some issues in the trenches on both sides of the line of ball, Travis, talking about offensive line, talking about on the defensive line. And one thing about Boise, they're bringing back a pretty good team. They should win their conference this year. They've got a two-headed quarterback situation with Kalani and Genti, and two-headed running back situation with those guys. And they got a quarterback by the name of Talon Green, if you haven't been following Boise. That's 3 players last year who combined to rush for more than 2,500 yards. I think they can kind of control the clock, if you will, in this game, control the tempo, and try to keep Washington's offense on the sideline as much as possible. And again, Washington, they're not elite level in the trenches this year. So I think Washington will come away with the win, but I could see Boise hanging this 2-touchdown number. And again, if it's 14.5, I might be tempted into jumping on Boise at 14.5, but I do think they're the right side this week.
Our second game tonight is one of those rivalry games. North Carolina at South Carolina. This is going to be Saturday night at 6:30. It's an ABC game. Mac Brown, he's still trying to replicate what he had at Texas.
Sure.
Of course, he had success at North Carolina before. He went to Texas, won the national title at Texas, went into the broadcast booth, decided to get back into coaching. I still think Mac still can coach even at his age. He's a 2.5-point favorite against the rival, over under at 64. That's a big number, that 64.
It is big with the new college football rules having to do with keeping the clock running. It's tough to bet overs when they get up to be 60 and higher anymore. But I'll tell you what, here's the thing. First, by the way, this game is being played in Charlotte. So It's not going to be at South Carolina. And a mistake that I've seen over and over for years, young bettors come into the books. They're not really paying close attention. They want to plunk some money down on a team, and they see, South Carolina is on bottom this week the way it's listed. But here's the bottom line. They're playing this game in Charlotte, North Carolina, so it's not a home game, so to speak, for either team. But I'm looking forward to this because you've got, obviously, Drake May, who's going for the Heels, the quarterback, who's probably going to be a top 6 or 7 pick in the draft next year. So we know what he's got. Spencer Rattler, I'm really interested in seeing if he has improved as much as they've been saying in the offseason, because he wasn't nearly as good in Norman, Oklahoma, as most suspected he would be coming out of high school in Arizona. And he's had some problems with confidence, things of that nature. So we'll see if he can come close to matching what May can do for North Carolina. Both defenses absolutely stunk on ice last year. They were terrible. And I'll give you a stat on North Carolina last year. They were like 122nd in the country against the rush in EPA, and I'll explain EPA in a minute. And they were 123rd against the pass EPA. And I brought this metric because I really thought we'd be able to impress Dr. Rob with this EPA metric and tell him, we dive into this like a fine surgeon also. When a team possesses the ball at the 50-yard line, for example, the probability that their drive is going to end with a touchdown is 30%. And because the value after the extra point is 7 points, the expected points from touchdowns on a drive that begins at the 50 is 2.1 points expected drive. Now, how you come by that is 0.3, which is the 30%. Take 0.3, multiply it by the points, 7, and you come out to 2.1. That's your expected points adjusted on offense and defense if a team starts with the football at the 50-yard line. Obviously, it goes down when you're at the 20 and such like that, and it improves as you drive down the field. So, again, North Carolina defensively denying those metrics, 122nd against the run last year, 123rd against the pass. I don't think the defense has improved that much. South Carolina's defense is not as bad as North Carolina's, but it wasn't good either. I think the difference in this game is going to be May, the quarterback who's got a ton of weapons, and I think they'll be able to pull off this win by a field goal or more. I didn't bet the game, Travis. I'm just going to let everybody know I like to be candid about that stuff. Don't have a bet on North Carolina, but I think if you wanted to jump in on this game, that's the way to go, because I think the offense is going to be a little bit ahead of South Carolina's.
You're like the Will from Good Will Hunting, man. You're like one of those savants when it comes to math. I mean, my head about exploded when you start bringing in decimal points. And how can you actually put that in layman's terms? Is there any way to put that in layman's terms?
I could make it real simple. you start your drive at the 50, you got a lot of better chance of scoring than you do at your own 20.
Okay, that makes sense. that makes sense. And the law just field, and that's why the field position game is so important, right? I mean, and that's why when you start deep, you're starting at your 5, your 10, your 15, or 20. And that's where the kicking game comes in, the punting game, so it's field position, folks. That's exactly what Scott is talking about.
North Carolina was terrible defending last year. They allowed teams to score over their expected point output, because of that. So that's why I threw that out there. But man, I brought that just for Rob, and then he doesn't show. Man, come on.
Yeah, I know. Our next game. This is an interesting one. This is going to be high profile. It's Sunday night, not a Saturday. It's a Sunday night on ESPN. It's LSU, Florida State. The Tigers a 2.5 point favorite. The over under on this at 56.5. And I thought Rob would show up for this because his daughter's a senior at Florida State this year. And I thought he would want to talk about the Florida State game, but he's busy. But this is going to be one of those spotlight games, right?
Absolutely. And it's, I don't always get involved in these hyped up games, but this was the first bet I made of my summer. And I'm not a guy who jumps on games in May or June. I usually wait until third week of July or thereabouts. And I jumped on LSU. I laid 2. As you see, it's 2.5. I thought there might be a chance that it gets to 3 when I made that bet, and wanted to lay the 2 there. Oh, by the way, I was going to say real quickly, I will give him a break since he is, an anesthesiologist, and, we'll give him a little bit of a break. But, as far as you look at what happened last year, I'm not a big revenge guy unless there were things that happened in that game that you just don't expect a team to make again later on in the season, or in this case, the next time they play each other. It was Brian Kelly's debut at LSU, and he went into the game with a 776 win percentage against ACC teams. Normally had his way with this conference. This team had yet to fully grasp what Kelly was preaching on both sides of the line of scrimmage, and they lost their best defender early in the game, Mason Smith, midway through the first quarter when LSU was up 3-0, and he was wreaking havoc. Now, Mason Smith is out for this game, but the bottom line is that they're better prepared, not only talent-wise this year, but also knowing what Brian Kelly, the buttons that he's pushing going into this year as opposed to his first year. So they had a 3-0 lead when Mason Smith leaves. They had a 30-yard field goal attempt blocked late in the second quarter. In fact, LSU special teams, man, they were a mess in that game, Travis. They had a muffed punt at their own 10-yard line late in the game. And also all this happened, and then the block extra point as they tried to tie the game at the end of regulation. So you had a block extra point, a block field goal, a muffed punt at your own 10-yard line, and you lost, what was it, by 1 or 2 points, or by 1 point in the contest. The offensive line's better this year for LSU than it was last year. The defense is deeper. Jaden Daniels, you got to watch him, dynamic at quarterback. LSU loaded at wide receiver. They own the better roster talent. The line originally did move to LSU, that it dropped the other way, that it's starting to come back up now to 2.5 with LSU. And again, this was the first bet I made of my summer, and I laid it with LSU. I think they get a win by at least a touchdown.
Wow. If you have a question for Scott Spreitzer, you can always call 402-543-5556. Again, 402-543-5556. That's the number to call. Keep watching because we have another special from Betfred coming up regarding the Nebraska-Minnesota game, which is tomorrow night. But, a game I'm going to be paying attention to. People can see the Tiger Hawk behind me. But I was going to open up against Utah State Saturday at 11 o'clock. This game's on Fox Sports 1. This has so many interesting things about it. Cade McNamara, the Michigan transfer, still questionable for the game to start at quarterback. You'd have Deacon Hill, who's a Wisconsin transfer, never thrown a college pass, could be the starter. I was a 24-point favorite. It needs to score 25 points a game, technically under contract for Brian Ferentz to keep his job. And then you have the over-under at 40. It's 45, and I believe that's moved in the last 12 hours too, hasn't it, Scott?
It has at, I'm going to say roughly 7:30 a.m. Central Time, your time. That total was around 45 as you got there on the screen. And today it's just dropped. It's down to as low as 42.5 in some books. I got a screen in front of me that I've got about 25 sports books from all over the place, Central America, all over the U.S., obviously, and of course in the state of Nevada. And I get to see all these books and all these changes. I don't see a single book right now higher than 43.5. And as I mentioned, most 43, some down to 42.5. Now I wonder if that, because I have seen McNamara go from probable a couple of days ago back to questionable. And I'm, wondering if people are jumping on that for that total because of McNamara's status, maybe not being so high right now, his chances to play in this game. It's really tough to do anything for me than to bet the total, than to bet the under. Iowa, this is a huge game for Iowa. I know that sounds crazy. They got a 24-point spread, 23.5. You're playing Utah State, but it is a huge measuring point for where this offense is with all the changes that have supposedly been made, other than the offensive coordinator. But I'm talking about McNamara if he plays, the game plan they're going to run, because this Aggies team is in a transition year. And you'll look at what Blake Anderson did first couple of years at Utah State. 2 years ago, 11-3. Last year, they dropped to 6-7 when they were expecting bigger things. And this year, after 6-7, they're saying transition year. There's a bunch of new faces that are going to be lining up for this Utah State team. Their offense ought to be completely shut down by this Iowa defense. I mean, just like we saw at Iowa in most of their games last year, assuming if McNamara is able to play in this game and play at least at 90% health, I think Iowa can win this game like 38-9. But I can't lay the points with the Iowa Hawkeyes not knowing enough about McNamara. And I can see why folks would jump in on the under. But this Utah State team is so bad on paper compared to where they were last year and the year before. This is a measuring. I'm going to tell you right now, even if McNamara doesn't play, if Iowa can't win this game like 31-0, 31-6 in that neighborhood, this could be a long year for the Iowa Hawkeyes if that offense doesn't show something. This is the perfect team. This is just what the doctor ordered for Iowa to have come out and have a big game.
Scott, I know there's some Iowa fans watching this, and I would tell you that based on their schedule, it's not a hard schedule by any means. I mean, they're thinking Big Ten title game, and you just sent shivers down their spine by saying if they don't win 31-6, that it's a bad sign. And I don't disagree with you. Do you pay attention at all to that 25-point contract thing with Brian Ferentz and whether they? But I don't think Kirk Ferentz he's an old dude, right? He's a pound the rock, control the clock type of guy. He's just going to do what he takes to win. And the truth is, if they win and win ugly, people will be happy because people like winning. But if they lose and they go 7-6, should we say, or whatever that looks like, people are going to be pretty upset because they've got Cade McNamara. They brought in a couple, wide receivers that were transfers. They want change on that offensive side, but they'll take wins before they'll take that 25-point total.
Hey, if you can win a game 6-3 and go 11-1, and every win is 6-3, you're going to take it over 48-31 and go in 6-6. So I get it, but I'm a big Kirk Ferentz fan, by the way, and I go way back since he first was hired as an Iowa Hawkeyes coach. I like his style. I'm a smash mouth Midwestern guy, and I dig it. But I did your original question about did you pay attention to this contract with Brian Ferentz, and I can say this. I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know that I want to play an under right out of the blocks with the Iowa Hawkeyes, because is he going to take a knee when he's up, let's say he's up 31-7, and they've got the ball deep in Utah State territory with 2 minutes to go. Is he going to be conservative and run off a couple of plays and then take knees? He's got to prove something, prove a point this year, and at 25 points apparently. And I just wonder if there's any of that thought process in there of, we're not going to take a knee. We're going to try to score because we got to build on what we're going to do throughout the season with this new offensive look. So, that kind of scares me off, that under, which is now dropped, as you mentioned, 42.5. So I do kind of pay attention to that stuff.
You came up, before we dive into the Nebraska game, you came up in conversation with my son, Owen, the other day. Owen produces the shows. He's the visionary behind all this stuff. And out in the garage, about 20 years ago, when they were tearing down Exarban Racetrack, and that's where you got started, right? You got started at Exarban. I've got 2 stadium seats, and he goes, "Do you think Scott would want those?" He goes, "If we get, I mean, they're old, and I've got them mounted, but they're from the original Exarban Racetrack. If I put them in my car and brought them down to Vegas, would you would that be good for your office?"
Oh man, I'll go out on the road and pitch Owen Justice albums if he wants, and he doesn't need my help. I would be all in. And, the story, and I'm not going to take too long on this, but the story that I told you before, that's where I made my, first ever bet that wasn't through a bookie when I was about 16 years old, was at Exarban Racetrack with my dad and next door neighbor. But we go back way back because and people can look this up if they want. Bobby Mundorf, Robert Mundorf, was a relative of mine through marriage. He was an uncle, and he raced at Exarban as a jockey, in the late 60s, early 70s. At the end of his career, he was jockey of the year at Del Mar back in 62 or 63. I forget what year it was. And my family, before I was even born, was traveling all the time with Bobby and the person in our family who he was married to. And they traveled all over to the tracks on the West Coast. They would fly back to Omaha at the end of these great vacations, Santa Anita, Del Mar, Chicago, all these different tracks. And they would end up back home with great stories to tell. And real quick, I'll wrap it up with this. So yeah, I'm saying the seats I would love. I would do, Owen could have a free weekend in Vegas on me. He brings those puppies out. But I'll tell you what, as far as, what he told me, and I was probably 9 years old, I'll never forget it. And Bobby's passed on, rest his soul. But we're at my aunt's house in Omaha, and we're sitting there for Thanksgiving dinner. We're talking, and I was already into sports betting. I like sports from point spread perspective since I was probably 6. So we're sitting there talking about games, and Bobby looked at me as we're talking about games, and he goes, "Well, tell you something about horse racing, son." And he goes, "You never make a bet in horse racing unless you already know who's going to win before you make the bet." You can take that for what it is, but that's why I never really got into horse racing a whole lot, other than the Derby and the Triple Crown and all that kind of stuff, the Breeders' Cup, So that came from a very good world-class jockey who gave me that advice. I want to make it real quick, Travis.
Yeah.
I got to throw this out there because I almost forgot. This happens to be about that Iowa-Utah State game.
Yeah.
What would you make I'm throwing you under the bus here. What would you make the over-under points total for Utah State in the first half? And then I'll tell you what it is. Utah State first half total points.
3.
It's 3.5. Very good job, sir.
Thank you.
For the game, it's 9.5. So it's telling you that Iowa should win this game without much problem. And if you look at the line and where the total is right now, the books are basically saying 33-10. It better be in that neighborhood if you're an Iowa Hawkeye fan, as far as I'm concerned.
We do have a special for you, and this is a risk-free Husker bet on the Minnesota game. Use the promo code CORN. Now, you got to be where Betfred is active across the United States. This is open to anybody. Well, it's open to anybody, but it's only exclusively given here on the Doc Talk podcast and Behind the Point Spread. Use the promo code CORN on a risk-free bet up to $50. So if you place a $10 bet and lose, you get $10 back. If you place a $25 bet and lose, you get $25 back. If you place a $50 bet and lose, you get $50 back. Now, remember, this isn't a free bet. It's a risk-free bet. So you must place a wager. And when you're on the app of Betfred, just reach out to the direct chat line in the help section of the Betfred customer service portal and type that promo code in. It will be recorded by the Betfred agent. So there's no other reason not to bet with Betfred on the Nebraska-Minnesota game, because you can bet this game risk-free. Nobody else is giving this sort of deal, and it's exclusive to Behind the Point Spread and Doc Talk podcast listeners. So here is the Nebraska-Minnesota game tomorrow night on Fox. Minnesota a 7-point favorite. The over-under at 43.5.
Yeah, that first opened 6 back in May. We saw Minnesota about a 6-point favorite. And again, that was around May 10th or so. The books that came along later, which are usually the deeper pocket books, as I like to call them, the kind of books that will take a bigger limit than those first ones that opened it up, basically opened at 7. We saw a lot of 7.5s all summer long on Minnesota. And right now there's a whole lot of 7s, as you mentioned with Betfred. Most of them are 7. Couple of 7.5 still out there if you want to grab the points with the Huskers. Oh my gosh, there's more unknown in this game than just about every game on the board. I wanted Luke Fickell or Matt Rule to be hired at Nebraska. They got one of the two. If anybody's going to turn this around, I thought it'd be one of those two guys. So I love Matt Rule. You know what and I'm going to kind of go off a little bit from the actual matchup just to say this, Travis, and I'm sure you've been around him enough now. When I watch Matt Rule on YouTube and I watch a lot of the Nebraska press conferences, I see a coach who's engaged. Yep. I see a coach for the first time in years who's always attentive to what's being asked of him and giving quality answers. I mean, he's got great sound bites, And so I'm sitting there, I'm watching him and going, for the last few years, I watched a head coach at Nebraska, not to pile on, who looked like he was an outsider, even though he was welcomed to Lincoln with more than open arms, and also looked like he was detached.
Yep.
You ever watched a movie you just can't quite get into
yep.
and you're kind of detached? That's Scott Frost to me. When he was giving press conferences, he looked detached all the time. And I see a very engaged football coach right now in Matt Rule.
I would say that Matt Rule has some of the highest emotional intelligence that we've seen out of a Nebraska football coach in a long time, maybe since Bob Devaney in that aspect. But his football IQ, I think, is really good too, and he's proven it at Temple. He's proven it at Baylor. And I'm with you. He's invested. He's engaged. And that's really what they needed at this point. And, when they take on Minnesota, these games have been close. I think the last 3 have been decided by 7 points. Minnesota, I believe, has won 4 straight in the series. We talk about those close games. Here's Matt Rule talking about the close games and where Nebraska needs to be in the fourth quarter.
We're going to be a team. I don't know when. We're going to be a team that plays our best football in the fourth quarter. Coach Osborne came up the other day and just wanted, what an unbelievable man. Just wanted to shake my hand and wish me luck. And we started asking him about Minnesota and started asking about some other things, and at the end of the day, he was like, we always wanted to be a team. His Cornhuskers that won the fourth quarter was the best team in the fourth quarter. And that's what we've been preaching since day one. So again, as I tell our guys, when the ethos of who we are matches the legacy of what came before us, then we can build a legacy that comes after us. And, this is a really good team. I don't know if we'll be the best team in the fourth quarter, but I can tell you that we will be trying to play our best football then. So if we do that, we're well on our way to being a team that can compete for wins and championships and bowl games and all the things that we want to have happen eventually.
What do you think of what he just said right there, Scott? Because they had a lot of close games last year. They just could not win the close game because Nebraska was not a fourth quarter team.
I like the combination of him saying we will be a fourth quarter team. I don't know when that's going to happen. So there is a little bit of a caveat there, but not that I don't get the feeling that he doesn't believe it's going to happen. It's just it may not happen in week 1 or week 2. And I don't know if he even meant to, give that kind of a feel to what he was saying, but that's what it felt like to me. Here's the thing. You mentioned how close the series has been, and it has been. Minnesota, I was going to say when you were mentioning that, they've found ways to win tight games that maybe they should have lost 1 or 2 under PJ Fleck. But there's a second half to that. Nebraska has found ways to lose in games that they should have won. It's a combination of the two. I don't think Matt Rule is going to lose games the way they did the last few years, maybe once or twice a season at the most early on, first couple seasons. But I think they're either going to win or they're going to get beat on the merit of their play more often than we've seen in a long time. The problem for me this first year, and I got a lot of friends still in Omaha and Lincoln and a lot of grads from UNL. And I still tell them, I go, man, if they don't get to a bowl game, don't panic. Don't go crazy. I expect them to win 6 games, maybe 7. I really do. But if they only win 5, don't go crazy. Because what he's got to do is he's got to sell the leftovers that these hangover players from under Scott Frost. He's got to sell them that, listen, we're picking in this game and we're down 14-0 because of a couple of bad mistakes midway through the second quarter. It doesn't mean we can't win this football game. He's got to get that doubt out of their minds. And that doubt's got to be heavy right now with these guys who played under Frost because they blew so many chances to win football games. So when things don't go their way, whether it be first half or fourth quarter, Rule's got to be able to get these guys that are holdovers to be able to believe in what's going on, what's being sold, what's been practiced, and be able to win these games. And, it might not be that easy for the guys that have been around for a couple of years to not have that mindset. They're humans to say, here we go again. That's scary this first year to me.
Losing can be contagious, right? It's the same as winning. Losing can be contagious. Jeff says Rule's our best coach since Pelini. Row the boat can't coach to save his life. Now, listen, I understand why he's not likable.
Yeah.
But to say that he can't coach to save his life is just it's inaccurate. The dude is 44-27, 9 wins a year ago. They were one of the best offenses on third down a year ago, one of the best defenses on third down a year ago, and their time of possession was sick. They held onto the ball for 34 minutes a game. The dude can flat out coach. Whether you like him or not, I don't think people like him because he's polarizing and he flaps his gums a lot. But PJ Fleck can coach football.
Yeah, I agree with the first part of that statement because I think Rule is the best coach Nebraska's had since Pelini, and I think maybe not in year 1, but by year 4. I think you might call him the best coach since Osborne. Not as good as Osborne, but the best coach since Osborne by the time 4 or 5 years. We're talking, when you and I are talking and we get Dr. Rob to show up in 2028, we might be talking about those things. But the bottom line is the second half of that equation of that statement, I'm with you. PJ Fleck has built an identity at Minnesota, and that's not easy to do at a program that really didn't have a winning identity. Let me give you some numbers real quick. And I'm not a stat head all the time, but this tells you how good this team was. some of their metrics are really outstanding last year. Third down conversion rate, top level. The defense was top shelf. They were great on third down ratio on offense. They were top 10 in total defense. They were top 3 in that third down rate on defense. They produced great defensive metrics. And guess what? They didn't have a pass rush. And yet they produced these kind of metrics. You don't do that by accident. You do that by your head coach and the coaching staff that he hires and what he's preaching to the kids. I love Ibrahim. He's gone. Ibrahim, to me, was one of the greatest, most exciting running backs in the college football game.
Agreed.
When he was healthy. I'm bummed that he's gone. Calic Manis, he's got some talent around him. This is no easy walkover for Nebraska's defense, the 335, which, by the way, I first saw years ago at BYU, when they ran a 335.
Well, hold on. Here's PJ Fleck actually talking about the 335 defense that Nebraska is going to be throwing at them tomorrow night.
What they do in the 335, it creates a lot of issues because you can be in a 3-down front before the snap and a 5-down front when the ball snapped, right? You can do that with double barrel. You can create all types of fronts, 4-down fronts, 5-down fronts. You can blitz to it to get to a certain front. You can stunt to get to a certain front. You can create angles constantly. So it's a very complex defense. And without any game film to know exactly how they're going to run it, again, that's what it means by preparing for ghosts. We have a sense, and there's so many ways you can do that. But there's a lot of ways you can do that. Now, which ones are they going to use? How often are they going to use it? What are the tendencies? You can go back to different places that coordinators have been or head coaches have been, but it's still not 100% accurate.
I think he's a little worried about it because when you don't really know what you're going to face, that throws a wrinkle. But that's where that fourth quarter becomes interesting. And Minnesota's been a second-half team. If they control that clock in the second half, that's where I think this thing's going to be winning. I think this game's won in the fourth quarter by either team. I do believe that.
Yeah, in Minnesota, let's not forget to run their offense. They got a brand new center. They lost one of the best in the country who's now playing on Sundays. They're going to be playing on Sundays. So the offensive line isn't probably quite at the level it was to begin last season. Sean Taylor's good at run. He's a transfer out of Western Michigan, and he was a heck of a running back. Maybe not Ibrahim, but he was a heck of a running back. So Calic Manis does have some people around him who can make some noise in this game. Nebraska's got to focus on busting up that offensive line a bit. I think that is the weakness on this offense. The one thing about Calic Manis, remember, he did come in, was it the Wisconsin game last year when he actually performed pretty well in that win. I think he threw for 300 yards, so it's not like he's a newbie. He made a point when he said we can go look at other places that ran the 335, including Syracuse, but it's going to be a little bit different. There's going to be some twists, obviously. Nebraska's just got to get over the fact that we find ways to lose games. If they can do that, they got a shot in this game.
We do got a question. Look at Owen's producing. He's screening the calls, which we haven't had a phone call yet tonight. If you do want to get a question in 402-543-5556. And you kind of hit on this earlier. How will the new clock rules affect the over-under betting this year?
Well, the volleyball match just ended, so we might get another call or two.
Yeah, Nebraska just won 3-0 over Omaha. That's not a shock, by the way.
No. Anyway, how will the new clock rules affect over-under betting? It's already affected in the amount of bets that are coming in on the over and the under because we're seeing a lot more under bets, and we've seen lines move. We just talked about a game a little bit ago that the total was 58.5, and not too long ago it was 62. And we saw that last week also. La Tech, FIU, that was a total that was around 60. And I'm going to say 24 hours before game time, all of a sudden it dropped to 57.5. These were two supreme offenses last year that brought a ton of guys back. Rich Rod down there at FIU, and they ended up playing if I remember right, like a 17-16 type of affair.
Wow. Yeah.
And so we're seeing the clock move more like the NFL, not completely like it, but more like it. And that makes it tough to bet overs. My best play last week, I had 3 plays last week. My top play was under between Ohio and San Diego State. It was 49, ended up around 47.5. They scored 33 combined points. And I think you look for these teams. So if Matt Rule sticks to what he's been saying, more tight end, fullback, all that kind of stuff, we're gonna be physical. We're gonna run the ball. This could be a game that lands in the 30s as far as combined points are concerned. But yeah, back to that question, the clock moving, less plays you're going to see in college football, and it means lower scoring games.
Did you put any money on the Nebraska game? And if you did or didn't, who do you think is going to win this thing?
I might jump in on the under. I haven't bet the side or the total, but the under 43.5, there's some out there, and I might bet that tonight, by the way, before we get to Thursday, because I'm afraid you're going to see some under money coming in on Thursday before game time. I'm going to say, just, again, don't anybody bet this side because of what I'm saying, because I'm not the kind of handicapper that goes, well, if they do this, an unknown product, and they do this, this could happen, or if they don't do this, that could happen. This is as unknown of a product as we have. Maybe not like Dion in Colorado, but it still is unknown. So I'm going to say Nebraska represents themselves at a decent rate, but I'm going to say Minnesota ends up winning this game. I'm going to say like 23-14 in that neighborhood.
Well,
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's a game where I'm going to be rooting like crazy for the Big Red to win 3-0 because I'm probably going to be on the under. But I think Minnesota wins by 7 to 10 points. No way do I think it'll be a blowout. But again, it's just too many unknowns, to be able to jump in until we see Nebraska play a game or two.
Here's Scott. Why they can make that bet is because it's risk-free. By using the promo code CORN on the Betfred Sports app, risk-free on bets up to $50. This is an exclusive for Doc Talk Sports listeners. Betfred has been nice enough to do this. You got to place the wager. So up to $50. And when you make that bet on the app, in one of the states that Betfred is operating, which you could use Colorado. We happen to use Iowa where we're located. Just reach out on the direct chat line in the help section of the Betfred customer service portal and type in that promo code in. It will be recorded by Betfred agents. So, Scott, I'm taking you off the hook. They can take your advice, and even if they lose, they're going to get their money back. That's a hell of a deal, right?
I like that. And I will put my name out there for LSU, whether they win or lose. But for Nebraska this week, I would say do what you feel is best, because there's too many unknowns. Go back to the top of the show. My mentor, nobody knows nothing about nothing. And that's the way I feel about it.
We got one more promo for you, too. There's still time to get your Power 5 promo in on the future bets. So place a $20 to a $100 wager on at least one regular season win total, market in each of the Power 5 conferences, and get a 10% Fred bet back based on your lowest stake wager. So again, still time to get some of those futures in. Scott, I got to be honest with you. I appreciate I always told you this is only going to be about a half-hour show. You and I swear you and I could probably do a 2-hour. And if Rob was here, we could go for like 2 hours. I mean, we've gone like 50 minutes, and hell, we still got more to talk about if we wanted to.
We've talked about 1/6 of the schedule, if that.
Yeah.
But in the future, we'll keep it as close to 30 as possible and maybe trim it down a bit. But there's a lot to talk about to start the season.
There really is. And, I hope people watching this understand we're not this isn't a show where Scott's going, hey, buy my lock of the week. Right. Scott and I have been doing business together for a long time. We go back about 20 years in our broadcast world together. And that's one thing I really liked about Scott is that he never came on my radio show and like, hey, here's my lock of the week. Call 1-800 or 1-900. It's never been like that with us. And it's just good, honest conversation. But if people do want to work with you, Scott, what does that look like and how do they do it?
Yeah, best way to do it is go over to docsports.com. And you see it on the screen there, DOCS. So docsports.com, not affiliated with Doc Rob, by the way. So it is docsports.com. It's been around for 51 years now.
Wow.
Obviously, the internet didn't come along until Al Gore invented it about 23 years ago. But Doc Sports has been around for a long, long time. Or they can just simply follow me on X or Twitter or whatever it's called, @ScottWins, because I post what I got going every day there. I'll say, if you want to jump on board, here's a free video. And also, I'm going to have, 3 plays in baseball or 3 plays in college football. I'm not a hard sell guy, and I've been doing this now in this business for 28 years now on a national scale and over 30 years now in the business. I would just rather let people decide if they want to play or not. I'm not going to scream and yell, oh, man, I'm going 8-0 this week, because you might go 0-8, and people don't deserve to hear a screamer. And I've never been one, and I never will be. And I appreciate you having me on the show again, by the way.
You and I could do a bunch of stuff together, and I like that. And our call screener just dropped. If you heard that little beep beep beep, but it's always great talking to you. I look forward to this all the time. And you and I, hell, we text during the week just to get some information and touch up. If you want to, I need to give all our viewers and our listeners a couple things. Make sure to follow us on Twitter. You can follow Dr. Rob on Twitter @DocTalkSports. You can follow Scott @ScottWins. You can follow me @TravisCreates. Make sure to like the Doc Talk Sports Facebook page. And yes, now we are on Twitter. or not Twitter, TikTok. We are on TikTok. We have a TikTok page. So, and make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are getting another one. Scott, will you be coming on the Morning Rush this year? Of course, it's my radio show that I do during the day.
Sure.
Scott doesn't like to get up as early because when we go on the air, it's 4 a.m. in Vegas. So if Scott comes on the air, we'll have to pre-record it or something like that.
Well, just let me know a few days in advance too, because I'm just going to tell everybody what I do about 3 nights a week. Stop working about 2 a.m., have a glass of Woodford Reserve, watch something on Netflix. So by 4 a.m., I'm ready to sleep. But we'll do it this year. I want to do it a couple times.
Excellent. Scott, we'll talk to you next Wednesday with another edition of Behind the Point Spread. Make sure to check out the Doc Talk podcast presented by Betfred Sports on iTunes, on Podbean, all sorts of good places. You can also watch the podcast on YouTube by subscribing to the Doc Talk Sports YouTube channel. Hopefully Dr. Rob will be with us next week. For Scott Spreitzer, I'm Travis Justice. Thanks for watching Behind the Point Spread, presented by Betfred Sportsbook.